All right, y'all, we live. We live. We live. A little 10 minutes before the hour here. 10 minutes before the hour. I got to get some sleep. Wake up early in the morning and do some things. So, greetings and welcome to those who just joined us. My name is Amuni Israel, Soulnomics 101. I guess we're doing the Lev Project 4-year anniversary special. Here we are. Ta-da! So to recap, we're reading Uncle Tom's Cabin, or we're listening to, which is saving my voice. I'm really enjoying this right here. And so to recap, we listened to chapter 1 yesterday. If you fall behind in this study, in this group community healing exercise, if you fall behind, no worries. Just go back, listen to the previous episode so that you can catch up. Okay, so just to recap what happened yesterday was the opening scene of slave trader coming to collect debt. He got the debt note for Shelby, the master of Tom. This is about Uncle Tom's Cabin. And Shelby has come to the conclusion that he's going to have to sell Tom, even against his better judgment. He doesn't want to, but it's either Tom or him. Um, and the trader wants him to throw in the young, what did he say, the quadroon young boy, because he was entertaining. And so that's where we are. Liza, which is Henry's mother, was eavesdropping. She heard the situation, and she took it to her missus, and her missus tried to have her rest assured that it wasn't as bad as she thought. But yeah, so now we're going to, that was my little summation of what happened yesterday. And again, feel free to share your thoughts in the box as we're listening. I kind of do that as I'm listening so that I can remember what to recap. So you do what makes you comfortable. Let's keep it clean and respectful. And here we go. Chapter 2. Can I be heard before I do chapter 2? Let me put a little greetings here. Can I be heard? Let me know if I can be heard in the box. Or type it in the box if I could be heard, and then I'll have to listen on this side. I think I could be heard. It shouldn't be a problem today. Hold on 1 second. Also, let's give people a little bit of time. I'm going in and around 9 o'clock. In and around 9 o'clock. I was going to do it a little earlier today, but then I remembered I said 9. So we're going to try to keep it in and around 9. But just let me double check that everything is up and running, and then I'm going to press play. I think this chapter is not as long as the first one, so if you come a little late, you might miss it. Okay, cool. Elif said he'd hear me. Then I won't waste time fiddling around on my cell phone. I could just go ahead and press play. All right, let's get it, y'all. All right, here we go. Chapter 2.
Chapter 2. The Mother. Eliza had been brought up by her mistress from girlhood as a petted and indulged favorite. The traveler in the South must often have remarked that peculiar air of refinement, that softness of voice and manner which seems in many cases to be a particular gift to the quadroon and mulatto women. These natural graces in the quadroon are often united with beauty of the most dazzling kind, and in almost every case with a personal appearance prepossessing and agreeable. Eliza, such as we have described her, is not a fancy sketch, but taken from remembrance as we saw her years ago in Kentucky. Safe under the protecting care of her mistress, Eliza had reached maturity without those temptations which make beauty so fatal an inheritance to a slave. She had been married to a bright and talented young mulatto man who was a slave on a neighboring estate, and bore the name of George Harris. This young man had been hired out by his master to work in a bagging factory, where his adroitness and ingenuity caused him to be considered the first hand in the place. He had invented a machine for the cleaning of the hemp, which, considering the education and circumstances of the inventor, displayed quite as much mechanical genius as Whitney's cotton gin. Note, A machine of this description was really the invention of a young colored man in Kentucky, Mrs. Stowe's note. He was possessed of a handsome person and pleasing manners, and was a general favorite in the factory. Nevertheless, as this young man was in the eye of the law not a man but a thing, all these superior qualifications were subject to the control of a vulgar, narrow-minded, tyrannical master. This same gentleman, having heard of the fame of George's invention, took a ride over to the factory to see what this intelligent chattel had been about. He was received with great enthusiasm by the employer, who congratulated him on possessing so valuable a slave. He was waited upon over the factory, shown the machinery by George, who, in high spirits, talked so fluently, held himself so erect, looked so handsome and manly, that his master began to feel an uneasy consciousness of inferiority. What business had this slave to be marching round the country, inventing machines, and holding up his head among gentlemen? He'd soon put a stop to it. He'd take him back and put him to hoeing and digging, and see if he'd step about so smart. Accordingly, the manufacturer and all hands concerned were astounded when he suddenly demanded George's wages and announced his intention of taking him home. "But, Mr. Harris," remonstrated the manufacturer, "isn't this rather sudden? What if it is? Isn't the man mine?" "We would be willing, sir, to increase the rate of compensation." "No object at all, sir. I don't need to hire any of my hands out, unless I've a mind to." "But, sir, he seems peculiarly adapted to this business." "Dare say he may be. Never was much adapted to anything that I set him about, I'll be bound." "But only think of his inventing this machine," interposed one of the workmen, rather unluckily.
"Oh, yes, a machine for saving work, is it? He'd invent that, I'll be bound. Let a nigger alone for that any time. They are all labor-saving machines themselves, every one of them. No, he shall tramp."
George had stood like one transfixed at hearing his doom thus suddenly pronounced by a power that he knew was irresistible. He folded his arms, tightly pressed in his lips, but a whole volcano of bitter feelings burned in his bosom and sent streams of fire through his veins. He breathed short, and his large dark eyes flashed like live coals, and he might have broken out into some dangerous ebullition had not the kindly manufacturer touched him on the arm and said in a low tone, "Give way, George. Go with him for the present. We'll try to help you yet." The tyrant observed the whisper, and conjectured its import, though he could not hear what was said, and he inwardly strengthened himself in his determination to keep the power he possessed over his victim. George was taken home and put to the meanest drudgery of the farm. He had been able to repress every disrespectful word, but the flashing eye, the gloomy and troubled brow were part of a natural language that could not be repressed. Indubitable signs which showed too plainly that the man could not become a thing. It was during the happy period of his employment in the factory that George had seen and married his wife. During that period, being much trusted and favored by his employer, he had free liberty to come and go at discretion. The marriage was highly approved of by Mrs. Shelby, who, with a little womanly complacency in matchmaking, felt pleased to unite her handsome favorite with one of her own class who seemed in every way suited to her. And so they were married in her mistress's great parlor, and her mistress herself adorned the bride's beautiful hair with orange blossoms, and threw over it the bridal veil, which certainly could scarce have rested on a fairer head. And there was no lack of white gloves, and cake and wine, of admiring guests to praise the bride's beauty, and her mistress's indulgence and liberality. For a year or two Eliza saw her husband frequently, and there was nothing to interrupt their happiness except the loss of 2 infant children, to whom she was passionately attached, and whom she mourned with a grief so intense as to call for gentle remonstrance from her mistress, who sought, with maternal anxiety, to direct her naturally passionate feelings within the bounds of reason and religion. After the birth of little Harry, however, she had gradually become tranquilized and settled, and every bleeding tie and throbbing nerve, once more entwined with that little life, seemed to become sound and healthful, and Eliza was a happy woman up to the time that her husband was rudely torn from his kind employer and brought under the iron sway of his legal owner. The manufacturer, true to his word, visited Mr. Harris a week or two after George had been taken away, when, as he hoped, The heat of the occasion had passed away, and tried every possible inducement to lead him to restore him to his former employment.
"You needn't trouble yourself to talk any longer," said he doggedly. "I know my own business, sir."
"I did not presume to interfere with it, sir. I only thought that you might think it for your interest to let your man to us on the terms proposed."
"Oh, I understand the matter well enough. I saw your winking and whispering the day I took him out of the factory. But you don't come it over me that way. It's a free country, sir. The man's mine, and I do what I please with him. That's it."
And so fell George's last hope. Nothing before him but a life of toil and drudgery, rendered more bitter by every little smarting vexation and indignity which tyrannical ingenuity could devise. A very humane jurist once said, "The worst use you can put a man to is to hang him." No, there is another use that a man can be put to that is worse. End of chapter 2. Chapter 3.
So that was the end of chapter 2. That wasn't a long chapter. Um, so we'll see if, as we have this discussion about what just happened, if we'll play chapter 3 as well. So welcome to those who've just joined us. This is chapter 2. And we're gonna go over to chapter 3. Let's see here. Let's start from the bottom. LF says it's a free country. Jason says interesting that this book points out the invention's origin, though still crediting to Eli Whitney. Yeah, and it's also interesting the reaction of we know a lot of the inventions were invented by melanated people and patented by Europeans who took the credit for it. But the reaction, I think, when I first heard the reaction of the slave master, I think it's George's slave master. Now all the names are gonna start getting me confused. But Eliza's husband, I think his name is George. His reaction is like, you know what? Um, you think you better than me. George is over here minding his business, being rented out. He's at the factory, he's working, and this thought of indifference, this thought of you know, I brought you here to work. I purchased you to work, and I bet a Negro, a ninja would invent something that's not going to make them do hard labor. All the while, you're not doing hard labor. You know what I'm saying? So there's this real crazy dichotomous thought that had to happen. There was a quote that talks about slavery being a scourge not only to the enslaved but to the master, that it hardens them and makes them cruel and unthinking, and any little concession that's given. If you hear the author, even of this book, taking great pains to, like, oh, she gave Eliza a real wedding and put real flowers in her hair, and there was cake to make it seem like any benevolence that I bestow onto you, you should you should be excited. You should accept it with great gratitude. There were some slave masters in other books that I've read that if you don't go over the top for whatever it is that you give them, that's an occasion for them to curse you. You know, you ungrateful wretch, you this, you that. So it's just weird, but it also, like I said, is very telling for a mentality that developed even to this day. Even to this day, you'll hear stuff like, oh, you ungrateful, such and such, as to say that whatever it is that I give you should be sufficient enough for you. You know, yeah, it's very, very weird. So since we got a little time, because we only had 13 minutes, I'm gonna go ahead and do chapter 3 too, because it's not that long. All right. So yeah, he's trying to sabotage only 1 or 2 years. Here's another one thing that I wanted to bring up. We're looking at the male-female relationship. It's on the rocks, given that they don't have the free will and the liberty to come and go as they please. It all depends on this master who's this perpetual um, father figure for everyone involved, for his wife, for the enslaved population. So everything has to kind of go through him. So he kind of stomped in there like an angry parent who rips their child away from extra credit activities. That's kind of how he went in there. Like, I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna take away band practice. You know what I mean? That's kind of how he went in there. Like, oh, you getting uppity? I'm gonna humble you. And so that's kind of how he went in there. And that's the total power that they were given, that they gave into themselves, really, and that they were drunk with. Like, who was really gonna come for you? You know what I mean? Who was going to really put you in your place? So let's go to chapter 3 now.
Husband and father. Mrs. Shelby had gone on her visit, and Eliza stood in the veranda, rather dejectedly looking after the retreating carriage, when a hand was laid on her shoulder. She turned, and a bright smile lighted up her fine eyes. "George, is it you? How you frightened me. Well, I am so glad you's come. Missus is gone to spend the afternoon, so come into my little room, and we'll have this time all to ourselves." Saying this, she drew him into a neat little apartment opening on the veranda, where she generally sat at her sewing, within call of her mistress. "How glad I am! Why don't you smile? And look at Harry, how he grows!" The boy stood shyly regarding his father through his curls, holding close to the skirts of his mother's dress. "Isn't he beautiful?" said Eliza, lifting his long curls and kissing him. "I wish he'd never been born," said George bitterly. "I wish I'd never been born myself." Surprised and frightened, Eliza sat down, leaned her head on her husband's shoulder, and burst into tears. "There now, Eliza, it's too bad for me to make you feel so, poor girl," said he fondly. "It's too bad. Oh, how I wish you never had seen me. You might have been happy." "George, George, how can you talk so? What dreadful thing has happened, or is going to happen? I'm sure we've been very happy till lately." "So we have, dear," said George. Then, drawing his child on his knee, he gazed intently on his glorious dark eyes, and passed his hands through his long curls. "Just like you, Eliza. And you are the handsomest woman I ever saw, and the best one I ever wished to see. But, oh, I wish I'd never seen you, nor you me." "Oh, George, how can you?" "Yes, Eliza, it's all misery, misery, misery. My life is bitter as wormwood. The very life is burning out of me. I'm a poor, miserable, forlorn drudge. I shall only drag you down with me, that's all. What's the use of our trying to do anything, trying to know anything, trying to be anything? What's the use of living? I wish I was dead." "Oh, now, dear George, that is really wicked. I know how you feel about losing your place in the factory, and you have a hard master. But pray be patient, and perhaps something—" "Patient?" said he, interrupting her. "Haven't I been patient? Did I say a word when he came and took me away, for no earthly reason, from the place where everybody was kind to me? I paid him truly every cent of my earnings, and they all say I worked well." "Well, it is dreadful," said Eliza. "But after all, he is your master, you know." "My master? And who made him my master? That's what I think of. What right has he to me? I'm a man as much as he is. I'm a better man than he is. I know more about business than he does. I am a better manager than he is. I can read better than he can. I can write a better hand. And I've learned it all myself, and no thanks to him. I've learned it in spite of him. And now what right has he to make a dray horse of me, to take me from things I can do, and do better than he can, and put me to work that any horse can do? He tries to do it. He says he'll bring me down and humble me, and he puts me to just the hardest, meanest, and dirtiest work on purpose." "Oh, George, George, you frighten me. Why, I never heard you talk so. I'm afraid you'll do something dreadful. I don't wonder at your feelings at all, but oh, do be careful, do for my sake, for Harry's." "I have been careful, and I have been patient, but it's growing worse and worse. Flesh and blood can't bear it any longer. Every chance he can get to insult and torment me, he takes. I thought I could do my work well and keep on quiet and have some time to read and learn out of work hours, but the more he see I can do, the more he loads on. He says that, though I don't say anything, he sees I got the devil in me, and he means to bring it out, and one of these days it will come out in a way that he won't like, or I'm mistaken." "Oh, dear, what shall we do?" said Eliza mournfully. "It was only yesterday," said George, "as I was busy loading stones into a cart, that young Massa Tom stood there, slashing his whip so near the horse that the creature was frightened. I asked him to stop, as pleasant as I could. He just kept right on. I begged him again,
and then he turned on me and began striking me. I held his hand, and then he screamed and kicked and ran to his father and told him that I was fighting him. He came in a rage and said he'd teach me who was my master, and he tied me to a tree and cut switches for young master and told him that he might whip me till he was tired, and he did do it. If I don't make him remember it sometime. And the brow of the young man grew dark, and his eyes burned with an expression that made his young wife tremble. Who made this man my master? That's what I want to know, he said. Well, said Eliza mournfully, I always thought that I must obey my master and mistress, or I couldn't be a Christian. There is some sense in it, in your case. They have brought you up like a child, fed you, clothed you, indulged you, and taught you, so that you have a good education. That is some reason why they should claim you. But I have been kicked and cuffed and sworn at, and at the best only let alone. And what do I owe? I've paid for all my keeping 100 times over. I won't bear it. No, I won't, he said, clenching his hand with a fierce frown. Eliza trembled and was silent. She had never seen her husband in this mood before, and her gentle system of ethics seemed to bend like a reed in the surges of such passion. You know poor little Carlo that you gave me, added George. The creature has been about all the comfort that I've had. He has slept with me nights and followed me around days and kind of looked at me as if he understood how I felt. Well, the other day I was just feeding him with a few old scraps I picked up by the kitchen door, and Massa came along and said I was feeding him up at his expense and that he couldn't afford to have every nigger keeping his dog, and ordered me to tie a stone to his neck and throw him into the pond. Oh, George, you didn't do it. Do it? Not I, but he did. Massa and Tom pelted the poor drowning creature with stones, poor thing. He looked at me so mournful as if he wondered why I didn't save him. I had to take a flogging because I wouldn't do it myself. I don't care. Massa will find out that I'm one that whipping won't tame. My day will come yet if he don't look out. What are you going to do? Oh, George, don't do anything wicked. If you only trust in God and try to do right, he'll deliver you. I ain't a Christian like you, Eliza. My heart's full of bitterness. I can't trust in God. Why does he let things be so? Oh, George, we must have faith. Mistress says that when all things go wrong to us, we must believe that God is doing the very best. That's easy to say for people that are sitting on their sofas and riding in their carriages, but let 'em be where I am. I guess it would come some harder. I wish I could be good, but my heart burns and can't be reconciled anyhow. You couldn't in my place. You can't now, if I tell you all I've got to say. You don't know the whole yet. What can be coming now? Well, lately Massa's been saying that he was a fool to let me marry off the place, and that he hates Mr. Shelby and all his tribe because they are proud and hold their heads up above him, and that I've got proud notions from you, and he says he won't let me come here any more, and that I shall take a wife and settle down on his place. At first he only scolded and grumbled these things, but yesterday he told me that I should take Mina for a wife and settle down in a cabin with her, or he would sell me downriver. Why, but you were married to me by the minister, as much as if you'd been a white man, said Eliza simply. Don't you know a slave can't be married? There is no law in this country for that. I can't hold you for my wife if he chooses to part us. That's why I wish I'd never seen you. Why I wish I'd never been born. It would have been better for us both. It would have been better for this poor child if he had never been born. All this may happen to him yet. Oh, but Master is so kind. Yes, but who knows? He may die, and then he may be sold to nobody knows who. What pleasure is it that he is handsome and smart and bright? I tell you, Eliza, that a sword will pierce through your soul for every good and pleasant thing your child is or has. It will make him worth too much for you to keep. The words smote heavily on Eliza's heart. The vision of the trader came before her eyes, and as if someone had struck her a deadly blow, she turned pale and gasped for breath. She looked nervously out on the veranda where the boy, tired of the grave conversation, had retired, and where he was riding triumphantly up and down on Mr. Shelby's walking stick. He would have spoken to tell her husband her fears, but checked herself. No, he has enough to bear, poor fellow, she thought. No, I won't tell him. Besides, it ain't true. Mrs. never deceives us. So, Eliza, my girl, said the husband mournfully, bear up now and goodbye, for I'm going. Going, George? Going where? To Canada, said he, straightening himself up. And when I'm there, I'll buy you. That's all the hope that's left us. You have a kind master that won't refuse to sell you. I'll buy you and the boy. God helping me, I will. Oh, dreadful! If you should be taken... I won't be taken, Eliza. I'll die first. I'll be free or I'll die. You won't kill yourself? No need of that. They will kill me fast enough. They never will get me down the river alive. Oh, George, for my sake, do be careful. Don't do anything wicked. Don't lay hands on yourself or anybody else. You are tempted too much, too much. But don't... Go you must, but go carefully, prudently. Pray God to help you. Well then, Eliza, hear my plan. Masser took it into his head to send me right by here with a note to Mr. Symes that lives a mile past. I believe he expected I should come here to tell you what I have. It would please him if he thought it would aggravate Shelby's folks, as he calls them. I'm going home quite resigned, you understand, as if all was over. I've got some preparations made, and there are those that will help me. And in the course of a week or so, I shall be among the missing some day. Pray for me, Eliza. Perhaps the good Lord will hear you. Oh, pray yourself, George, and go trusting in him. Then you won't do anything wicked. Well, now, goodbye, said George, holding Eliza's hands and gazing into her eyes without moving. They stood silent. Then there were last words and sobs and bitter weeping. Such parting as those may make whose hope to meet again is as the spider's web, and the husband and wife were parted. End of chapter 3.
All right, y'all. That was crazy, right? That's the end of chapter 3. So we're going to pick up at chapter 4. Chapter 3. Chapter 2 was wild. Chapter 3 was even more crazy. Let us know your thoughts in the box. Eliza, she's jaded, and this is another thing that we have to realize that, as I've shared before, is that people had different employers. I use that word loosely. It's different masters over them who had different uh, a different work culture, and so you're having like somebody's working at a different location from you, and although you are all on the plantation, you're on the plantation in different ways. So Eliza's married but not really protected under this law of being quote married, and so she and her husband is having this discussion, and I don't know why she keeps calling him wicked. Like, don't be wicked, George. Don't. I'm like, how many times you gonna call the brother wicked? He's like, yo, you don't understand what I'm going through right now, and how many people can relate to that in 2020. Now we're in 2020, where the male and the female are having a discussion, and one may not see it the way the other one is seeing it because they're not experiencing it. Although they may be in the same space together, they're not experiencing it in the same way. And so, she's over here like, don't be wicked, don't do this, don't do that. And he was like, yo, you pray for me. She's like, pray for yourself. I mean, Eliza was going in. Eliza was going in early, but imagine you going along and thinking everything is normal, and then all of a sudden one day, dude drops by and be like, yo, I may never see you again. And how that affects relationships, how that affects trust, how that affects the thought of whether or not you can bring me stability, because the reality is he wasn't stable. He can no longer, as a man, he's like, I can't take this oppression anymore. And she's looking at him like, well, woo, what's that going to mean? On top of that, you have the system promoting promiscuity and promoting not being emotionally attached to the feminine principle. So we see all of this stuff trickle down in today's space and time, and these are some of the roots of where it's coming from. Teresa said he should have took her with her. It's it. We're gonna continue to look let the story play out. But yeah, that would be the thought. But remember, he seems to have been planning already. Like he said, I have some plans. But when you're taking a young child on the road, even today, you go on a road trip with a young child, it's a lot. So when you're taking a young child on the road and you're moved there, I think they're in Kentucky, right? So you're going from Kentucky to Canada. There's a lot of things to consider on the way. And this is like last minute. This is not like she had time to be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go with you. It was just like on some old last minute, hey, what's going on, George? George is having the woe is me. He's singing the Carl Thomas, I wish I never met her. He's tripping. She's getting pulled into his matrix. Like, what's going on with you? And then the next thing you know, he was like, yeah, and to top it all off, I'm out. Like how do you process that? There wasn't even enough time. That lead up, he was like, if I tell you what I gotta tell you, you really ain't gonna like it. And then he drops it like it's hot, and then he's like, oh, by the way, I'm out. And this is what happened. This is real life experiences of your great grandparents, great great grandparents, things that they internalized that created thought processes and the way you think about love and the way you think about relationships and the way you think about family. We may just get the trickle down effect. We just may get, whatever is left from the experience, not really ever hearing the story, what happened. We don't get that. We get how people adjusted as a result of what happened. We get the fear, we get the cynicism, we get the all of that other stuff without understanding what really happened. And then you see patterns within that family, or everybody has an issue with relationships or issue with their children or issue with, and you look throughout the family and you see this pattern because you inherited that trauma, not really understanding where it's coming from. So, for those who just joined us, you're going to have to listen to the replay. How many people heard the animal abuse? A lot of things that I find interesting. They say, what's going on in America today? And they say that people really haven't addressed the original sins. The original sins of the founding of this country are things that if you don't atone for them, because this is energy that was created and it surrounds the entire place. It's in, it's the blood that spilled on the ground. It's the words that were pronounced. It's all of that that envelops the nation. And when you look at animal abuse, like what he just described, and we know it's a fictional retelling, but some of the stuff, like I've read other accounts that's not fictional, but the animal abuse of the master looking to hurt the enslaved person, George in this case, and takes his dog and ties a weight around his neck and drown him in the water. And George is left paralyzed, not able to even rescue. Today's space and time, you try to pull that if you want to, you know what I mean? But just to see a lot of the brutality and the brute force and the you know just very negative things that many of these institutions is built on, it makes you really wonder. Let me see. LF says, I think most people have had that feeling when their boss is less qualified than them. And that was interesting. He's like, well, who made you my master? You're less qualified than I am. I'm smarter than you are, and here you are governing over me. That is a feeling. That is some feeling. And as LF, he filled George on that. That's a feeling like, what in the world? you know. So with that said, let me know how you guys are enjoying this so far. Uncle Tom's Cabin, we did chapter 2 and 3. We'll come back and do some of the chapters are longer than the others. So we'll come back and discuss let me see. Chapter 4. Here we go to chapter 4. Chapter 4 is kind of lengthy. So we'll do chapter 4 and then we'll go on. If they're short, then we'll put them together. If they're lengthy, then we'll, Kev says, and they call Mike Vic Monster. I mean, I'm telling you, you read some of these narratives, you'd be like, what? And the issue is not talking, not bringing it out in the open. So it's this hypersensitivity to, um, oh, somebody's crime, oh, this person lied, oh, that person, when it's not you, when it's not them. What I mean? Not realizing that you were the people who set this tone. You set this tone in this place, and you don't, it's like a saying that says, thief not likes a thief with long back. Like a thief doesn't like to see another thief, you know what I mean? Getting ahead. And so it's kind of like that. It's kind of like this falsified sense of being just, then not really being just, but I just don't want to see you, you know do what I do and get ahead. And that's And that's kind of what we see going on. I remember one episode. It was of Farrakhan was talking to, what was the name of the newscaster? Uh, Tad Farrakhan was on like a nightly news show, and the newscaster was asking him about, I think it was Nigeria, and he was like saying, Nigeria is the most corrupt place on the continent. Da, 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 da. And Farrakhan stopped him like, wait a minute. He says to him, "You're not the person to be talking about this right now." And I thought that that was very. And the guy looked at him like, "What? Say what again, Jason? Say what again?" Farrakhan, let me know. Say what again? Tell me exactly. Let me see what was the name of the newscaster where Farrakhan said that to. And the reason I find that interesting, he says, "You're not the one to be having this discussion, giving your history, giving your background, given the fact that you're not bringing all of this stuff out, but you're quick to bring it out when someone else does something." What I found, and I'm winding down now, let me see. What I found interesting, I always say interesting, fascinating today on the news was that the ex boyfriend of Bobby Christina, they said, passed away today. He's a young boy, 30 years old. And so I'm sitting there this morning as I'm trying to get ready, and I'm like, wait a minute. They say the young man passed away. Why are you showing pictures or video of him in a jail jumpsuit? And I'm like, what association? Usually somebody passed away, you're showing a picture. Maybe you're saying it's an association with her, so you may show a picture with her. No, you're showing him in a courtroom or at a hearing, in a prison jumpsuit. And I'm like, I'm not seeing the correlation. The person is dead. Then why are you showing this picture? Like, this is the last thing I want you to remember of him. Um, which is just, just something that we have to, that whoever frames the conversation, uh, hold on, let me see what the name of this news report is. Mike Wallace. It was a Mike Wallace. I'm not going to play it because they're going to copyright strike me. But Mike Wallace, Minister Farrakhan told, it's the Mike Wallace interview. You could just look it up. I could give you guys, where he's like, listen, you're not the one to be having this discussion. Like, how are you going to sit in a place to say you're going to judge something when the things that you have done have not rightfully been judged? This is what this reparations discussion, in my estimation, is about. And this is why many people on the other side are running from the reparations discussion, because the heaviness, the magnitude of the transgressions that were committed, they need to be talked about. They need to be brought out on the mat. They need to be examined. Um, there was one family who did do that, and they were one of the biggest slave trading families in the North. They were called the DeWolf family. You can look it up. They did a documentary. What's the name of the documentary? Y'all know me. I like to say things and then give y'all the information. DeWolf documentary. The DeWolf family documentary was named. Mm, he was one of the biggest slave traders. The name of the documentary was named Traces of the Trade. That's the name of the documentary. How many people have seen that documentary? It came out many years ago. But this Traces of the Trade goes and talks about the Wolf family, and they were in Rhode Island, and they traced back how their family came into the money that they came into. And they were one of the biggest slave trading families in at that time. And so that documentary has them going back to the continent, retracing their steps, and looking into all of what their family, as collective, what their collective um, cultural memory of that family and how they contributed to the state of affairs here in America. So look the Wolf family up. Uh, oh, Teeth Nalaxi Teeth with long bag. Yeah, LF got it. Yeah, a thief doesn't like to see a thief. There's a patwa saying, a proverb, that a thief doesn't like to see another thief with a long bag. Both of them are stealing, but your bag look a little longer than mine. You know what I mean? So then that person begins to feel indifferent and hate on it. You know what I mean? And so it's just basically people who have done wrong watching other people who have done wrong and taking the light off of their wrongs so that they can highlight other people's wrongs. And if I could switch the narratives and look at what these people are doing, oh my goodness, they're acting like crazy savages, da 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 da. And in reality, like there was spaces in time where people were challenging each other to duels. Like if you disagreed in this country, they would be like, young man, I'm going to challenge you to a duel, and they're going to fight to the death. Like, what? You know what I mean? You coming outside in your long sword on your hip because the person didn't agree with you, and you're challenging them to a duel, wanting to kill them for a disagreement. Today, the sword is replaced by a gun. And people are finding themselves in that same place. So a lot of this stuff has been done. It's in the records, it's in the archives. But, if I get you to look at the little shiny thing in the corner, then I could pretend like this is not a part of um, our history. They say, forget about the history. And I'll leave it at this. Anybody who says, oh, this happened in the past, this was so long ago, I don't know why you're still talking about it, is deflection. July 4th, every year, you're celebrating 1776 independence. That happened a long time ago. It's still relevant every year. You're still celebrating you breaking away from your mommy and your daddy England. That's the sign of your rebellion. You're still celebrating it. And no one is saying, hey, why do you keep celebrating July 4th? That happened so long ago. Why are we still talking about when you broke away from England? When you defeated them. Nobody says that. You know what I mean? Nobody says, hey, why are you still reading that Constitution? They wrote that so long ago. That's old. That's outdated. But when you say, hey, let's talk about what happened during that time, then you hear, no, no, no. No, we don't want to talk about that. You still on that other stuff. Let's get over that. Let's move forward. Let's sing Kumbaya. Like, wait a minute now. It only seems to work on one side. You know what I mean? Kev says, like when they say that melanated people like to steal, but they like to steal whole people. Did he say whole people? But yeah, that was because that's one of those talking points. If we talk about stealing, which is petty stealing, like I said, we're gonna read where the thought is about petty stealing. So basically, I can steal you, but you can't steal from me. That's that double standard. Like you said, you stole whole peoples. You stole a whole person. Like, how do you steal a whole person and then tell this person, hey, you can't steal a piece of bread? And the reason why they can't take the piece of bread is because they're taking a piece of bread is because they're hungry. So you stole a whole person, then you're maltreating a whole person, and then gonna, blight that person's name by saying they're a thief and they're no good and they're lowly because they took something for their survival. So this is the mind game that has been played for a very, very long time. I don't. I went into stealing. There was a funny narrative. It was funny only because of the way um, he narrated it. But it was in one of the books that we read, and they were so hungry that they would, either take a sheep or take a goat or whatever the case may be at night, and they would cook at night, and they would kind of like smother it down so the smell wouldn't get out. And then the master, he was like, "Oh, what's going on?" Like you want to say, what's going on in Tom's cabin down there? So he made his way over there, and there was still lights on. You know what I mean? So he busts in there. The way the narrative have, he busts in there, and the goat. I think it was goat or mutton. I can't remember what they were cutting, but it was in the pot, right? And so they were trying to hide it, but the feet of the animal was sticking out the pot. And these are some of the stuff that they had to do to to survive, to eat. Some mothers were so hungry that they didn't have sufficient enough to feed their children. And so they would take the animals that they were looking after. They would take a chicken and cook it and eat it. And so when the slave master comes in the day, he's indifferent. He's upset that, hey, you're stealing my stuff. And they would say things like, oh, them niggas, them ninjas over there, they steal. Well, Master John's Negroes, they steal. You got to watch out for them. That's because Master John, 9 times out of 10, is misappropriating funds and he's abusing his quote unquote hands. So this is kind of the conversation that Eliza, to get back, and George, her husband, is having. Eliza has a quote good master, which he ain't gonna be good in a minute because he's gonna try to sell her little one. And George has an evil. Let me see what the quote was. The evil. The quote was that the book said it, that he was. Let me go back up here. Vulgar, narrow-minded, tyrannical master. That's what the book said concerning George's master. He was vulgar, narrow-minded, and tyrannical. And the thought is, I quote, own you so I can do whatever I want. And truthfully, a lot of males idolize the power that the so-called master had, internalized it, and then thought that that was the definition of a man. And then we see some of that even today. I quote own you, or I'm your husband, so I get to tell you, you do, I'm going to do you like the master did me. And we see some of that in today's space and time, unfortunately. So with that, Trish says, jealous of the others, thieves, bigger bag. Pretty much. Like, you got more than me. You got more than me. So if you're enjoying it, let us know. Give a thumbs up on the video. So I invite friends and family who may have see some value and enjoy it, so we can have you know conversations that's based on things that were left on record for us to glean from. So with that said, tomorrow is Shishi. Tomorrow is Friday. I'm not gonna be able to come on this late tomorrow. So if I don't get here early enough, then I'll just come on after the Shabbat, which is in the evening. I'll come on like about 8:30, 9 o'clock. After I don't rest up, y'all already know. So with that said, thank everybody for tuning in. This is Lev Project 4-year anniversary special. All right. Everybody have a blessed day. Comment under the video. Let us know if we missed anything.